Oh, we're live. We are live. Poduty in the news at the Pittsburgh Podcast Theater. Wait, it's not Pittsburgh Podcast. It's the Tarentum. I don't know where I'm at. I'm just kind of walking around the theater, doing my thing. We have a brand new episode, Poduty in the news. I've got a great guest joining me. Jessica Sutton is here.
Hi.
Jessica, hello.
Happy to be here.
So glad to have you here. I got one question for you, Jessica. What time is it?
It is 10 o'clock.
What time is it? What time is it? Oh, it's time for Poduty and the news. Poduty and the news. The only live news podcast about podcasting from the stage. Poduty and the news. Poduty and the news. The only live news podcast about podcasting from the stage.
And we're back. We are on the stage now. Our last show of the Christmas stage. Jessica's here. Jessica Sutton, everybody. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We first met, I think, at a Pittsburgh podcast meetup,
Yes.
maybe March, April of last year.
Yes. And I was at a Phil Better show. That was the one I was at. Like, I think we were talking about that earlier before we got live on stage.
That was the first time we met. Was Phil Better?
Yes.
Wow. Phil was just on the show last week, international speaker, Phil Better himself. But Jessica came to us, met some podcasters during that event, and has a big show coming up in January. Tell us a little bit about what you've been working on.
So I've been working on an audio drama primer class that's going to be here at the Poduty Podcast Theater live, 2:30. So if you're interested to learn more about audio drama, come on down and I'll tell you about my experiences.
Awesome. That is January 17th.
January 17th.
Tickets at poduty.com, poduty.com. And you're also a showrunner for a
Yes.
podcast. Tell us a little about the show.
So my podcast is called Fate of Korr. It is an audio drama. It is a fantasy set in a pseudo 1910s world, but it kind of has like fantasy creatures in it. So basically imagine like Lord of the Rings, but all the characters' time is like fast forwarded to like the 1910s kind of vibe. And it's like a different world. So it's not exactly Tolkien's world, but it takes some of those same creatures and puts them in the political sphere that was like kind of going on in the 1910s, particularly in Russia, but it's not set in our Russia. It's kind of set in this pseudo what if world. And it's pretty fun. A couple of my friends have even said there's like this like little father-son journey going on there too. So if you're into family kind of stories, there's a little bit of that, but there's a lot of factions and magic, and I really, really think it's a good show, and I hope you guys subscribe and listen to it.
Fate of Korr, is that correct?
Yep. Korr spelled K-O-R.
K-O-R.
A double R. So
K-O-R.
Yep.
And is there a website, or do you just recommend finding it on iTunes?
You can find it on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify. I believe we have a transistor site. But you can find it easily on YouTube from Fate of Korr and on wherever you find podcasts.
Awesome. And that season 1 has wrapped. Is there?
So we are going to be resuming publishing episode 8 of season 1 early next year. So we're currently working through that. But the first part of season 1 is out for episodes 1 through 7. And currently I'm drafting season 2, which where things are left off in season 1, which will be left off on a 14 episode basis. Then you'll know, like, I don't want to spoil anything. That's why I'm kind of being hesitant, because like it hasn't even been released yet.
Well, that we'll have all the links and a description in the show notes. So when you go through these 6 stories, we're gonna go through 6 stories coming up. I'm gonna have Jessica's bio, links to connect with Jessica, links to Fate of Korr. So find all those links in the show notes. Are you ready for our first story?
I am ready.
We have Radiolab took science live in Little Rock, and this happened on December 11th. Radiolab headed to the Ron Robinson Theater for a sold-out live recording that doubled as a major fundraiser for Little Rock Public Radio. The event, part of Radiolab Presents Viscara, focused on the urgent and very human science behind antibiotic-resistant bacteria, blending immersive sound design with expert conversation led by hosts Soren Wheeler and Dr. Avir Mitra. Joined on stage by leading voices from epidemiology and agriculture, the show brought together researchers, medical professionals, students, and public radio supporters for an evening that proved live podcasting can tackle complex topics while driving real community support, complete with a silent auction, VIP reception, and a clear reminder that live audio storytelling can educate, engage, and fund public media all at once. Now, it's so obvious after meeting Jessica, everybody watching at home, why I chose this as the first article. And you even mentioned, I think when we were talking earlier, how much Radiolab was influential, how much you love listening to Radiolab.
Exactly. Like around the time I was getting into podcasts, I was also listening to Radiolab, like very heavily, like because at the time I was working as a temp, filing and like scanning documents. So it was like something I could listen to while I'm going. And I really like Radiolab because like, even though it is very much a talk show versus a like audio drama, they use audio and sound design to tell their stories and kind of like talk about like what their concepts are. Like I remember there was this particular one where they used like these singers kind of like to represent like what biodiversity is. And like they were like using the notes and describing like, here's this whole cacophony of sound in this music, but as biodiversity like got more and more like restricted, less and less sound, and then it became quiet. And like that is a very powerful way to use audio to explain a scientific concept.
And after when I first met Jessica, she was telling me about audio dramas, and it wasn't really a world I was familiar with. And you start telling me all these great stories and sharing these great podcasts with me. And then when I see a story like this about all the things that Jessica's working on, you can take to a live environment. You can do a live show with sound effects, with Foley, with tell this great storytelling, and have this immersive event for the spectators to really, be pulled into that story. And I didn't even know this existed until we had connected. And it's just a whole new world of podcasting.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. It's a very like interesting. Like I've seen a couple podcast live shows. Of course, I've seen the juggernaut of Welcome to Night Vale. I saw that in Seattle when I went to PodCon back in. I think that was that 2000. That might have been 2016. I had to double check because PodCon only went for like 2 years and then they kind of fell off. But I remember going to the live show of like Welcome to Night Vale that they had there, and like it was a very much like the speaker Cecil Palmer was like talking to the audience, but like there was like stuff going on in the background and a lot of like talking back and forth. It kind of had like a similar setup to, have you ever heard of Prairie Home Companion?
No.
Yeah. So that's something that NPR did for a while. And it was I would consider it an audio drama talk show where it was like this panel of people talking. And that was like a long time ago when I saw it. So I'm kind of talking a little out of my depth here. But like they would be performing and talking about the world and the story as if they were like a radio program hosts and just discussing their world together.
Yeah. So a big part of that I took away from this is what I think can be a live podcast is expanded. It certainly goes into the world where Jessica's creating content and you're able to really have like old time, like almost like before television, before radio, have this storytelling, close your eyes and pretend that you're in this world, this environment, and do all that. And there's podcasts out there that are doing it on a recorded level. But I think the next level is, can you perform those in front of an audience? And this really just one of those things that just opens your mind to the possibilities.
Exactly. And there's like table reads, and also a lot of the audio drama field does overlap into the video gaming live show aspect as well. Because there's a lot of RPGs that use live shows as a way to show the story, and like a lot of the characters will dress up, a lot of the actors will dress up as their characters that they're playing as to kind of add to the atmosphere while they're playing.
And we talk about showing the story. We go to our next story. We've got Netflix committing to video podcasts. What is going on here? Let's see if we can find out.
Yeah, we'll look at this. I know when I was reading this story before coming on to the Poduty in the news, like I was mixed about this, honestly. But like, well, I'll let you say what your piece. On
Yeah, Netflix eyes video podcast to take on YouTube. Another point of contention for some podcasters. Netflix revealed plans to aggressively enter the video podcast space in early 2026, telling potential partners it wanted 50 to 75 shows ready at launch, with ambitions to scale to as many as 200 over time. According to reports, Netflix had already begun approaching major talent agencies, podcast networks, and creators to license existing shows and develop originals across genres like comedy, sports, true crime, and pop culture. The move positioned Netflix directly against YouTube, now the leading platform for podcast consumption, and followed a deal with Spotify to carry popular shows like the Bill Simmons podcast. While Netflix dangled competitive licensing offers and major marketing support, its insistence that creators remove video from versions from YouTube raised questions about data access, audience ownership, ad formats, and whether podcasters would trade long-term platform control for short-term exclusivity.
So my mixed feelings on this is like, so if you're a creator and you're approached by Netflix, like the deal and the money is probably going to be a lot more fruitful because like a lot of times when like you're approached by a bigger studio, you get the money and that's kind of going to help you produce. So I can kind of see why this might be appealing. But as also somebody that like is an independent podcaster, knowing that there might be a loss of control because now that person has a say in what you are creating. So it kind of creates a little bit of a too many cooks in the kitchen situation. So like, but I can see why people would find it attractive. The other issue that the article doesn't cover, that was the first thing I thought about when I listened to this. If this tanks because they don't market it well, or people don't understand why they're moving to podcasts, this might make it harder to do something like this again for other groups that are like in the business of podcasting, because someone's gonna be like, well, Netflix tried that, it didn't work. It's like, it didn't work because they didn't do it right and they didn't understand what they were getting into. So I'm looking at this article with trepidation because it could either work out really well or it could become something that's going to turn out bad for everybody else if it fails, because it's gonna not look. So that's where I'm kind of standing with what I read here.
Yeah, for Netflix, it's advantageous for them to go after podcasting. I'm sure the cost to produce one episode of Stranger Things is millions of dollars.
Oh yeah.
The cost to produce one episode of the Bill Simmons show might be $100,000.
Exactly. And that's a big positive to podcasting. It has that low barrier to entry and you can produce, and it's like really, like it's accessible to people across all genres, across all like walks of life. If you're in rural Pennsylvania, you can like create a podcast that can create a following and create like inspiration in your audience and stuff. But like, and like, I don't know, I felt really mixed when I was reading this because I saw like also the ad revenue going away, because like that's how a lot of people make their money. So if they don't have that ad revenue and they're waiting on the bill from Netflix, there's just like a lot of moving pieces that I'm curious to see what will happen.
Yeah, and I get the exclusive deals, and I get what you're saying. If somebody offered us money for Poduty in the News to be on Netflix, it's probably going to be a better deal for me to take that than to not take it. So it's hard to turn that kind of money down, which I get. Where I have issue with this is, podcasting is an open format. Mm-hmm. I can listen to it on the device I want. I can stream it, whether on iTunes, whether on Pocket Cast, or whatever app I'm using. These sites want to lock down the content. And to me, that's not in the spirit of podcasting. That's not distribution like I would expect from podcasting. And I get they're paying money. They want return on that. But they should also they could still release that on Spotify and brand it as a Netflix show.
There's a couple ways they could approach this that could avoid that problem. Like I know on YouTube, there's a lot of creators that produce like censored versions on YouTube, but then have uncensored versions on platforms like Nebula. So they have two versions. So they could do something like that where they have the censored version on YouTube, but then carry it over to Netflix, the non-censored version. But the other issue that, to go to what you're saying, like the free access, there was a group called Watcher that launched their streaming service too early. And it caused a lot of pushback with their fans. So if a lot of these podcasts have already been on the air for free, they might get pushback from their fans who are used to that, because now they have to buy Netflix to listen to the shows.
Yeah, I have a beef with Amazon over that. I used to get Amazon Prime with no ads. Now I got to pay $3 a month to get rid of the ads. So you're right. If I am used to a certain way, if you built a relationship with me by delivering content in exchange for, I'll listen to your ads, but I'm not going to pay for the content. That's the arrangement that we have.
Yeah.
When you turn that around and say, oh, now you have to subscribe to Netflix to listen to the show, that becomes a problem. Right?
Exactly. And that's part of one of the reasons why I'm watching with trepidation as well, because we don't know how the audience is going to react, and hopefully not to the detriment.
You mentioned you're watching, but do you know who's watching us? It's the UFOs. When Ufology met remote viewing live on stage. This special episode was recorded live during the International Remote Viewing Association conference, where hosts Kelly and Jay sat down for an intimate fireside-style conversation exploring the intersection of ufology, PSI, I don't even know, phenomena, is it
Psi phenomenon.
Psi phenomena, and remote viewing. Bringing together two communities that rarely share the same stage, the discussion examined how both disciplines challenge consensus reality and push deeper questions about perception and consciousness. Rather than focusing solely on external phenomena, the conversation turned inward, touching on imagination, creative integrity, and anonymous storytelling. And the idea that remote viewing may be one of the most grounded ways to approach the unknown. That was a tough one for me to get through, but I did it.
Yay.
And this is one of those examples that we love to give on this show. This is not necessarily something that I would think about. I don't think about UFOs or remote viewing all that often. But if that's what you're interested in, guess what? There's opportunity to see events like that live. They're on a nice stage. They had some nice production. Jessica was complimenting them on their production value. And they're able to get in front of a group of people who love remote viewing, UFOs, and share some of their experiences, their stories, and just kind of bring that community together.
Exactly. And when I was doing my pre-research for today's newscast, because I like to look at things before I sit down so I can get settled and comforting. I didn't even realize this was about UFOs until I was 10 minutes. I was like, wait a second, what? That is how well the production value and how professional it was. And it kind of kept me watching a little bit longer than I would have, because of the fact that they were able to produce it in an environment I wasn't normally used to hearing those kind of stories. So it does matter to be able to have a space to talk and a platform to talk, more than just where you were currently at. Although if you are currently at a similar stage, welcome. We see you.
If you're watching us from afar.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. We stream on Facebook, LinkedIn, and free through remote viewing.
Yes. Yes.
But again, just a great way to bring a community together. It's simple. And I love the wood paneling. It's they're in a lodge environment, and it's just cozy and comfy, a safe space. They can talk about what they love, what they're interested in, and they're going to meet people who have the same ideas, maybe the same experiences. And just congratulations on putting a show together and being able to record it and share it with the world. Exactly.
And as I said, they definitely had their presentation together, which was impressive. But yeah.
Oh, we're going back in time, not 1910s in pseudo Russia, but we're going to Victorian history. Got naughty. Live on stage on December 12th, 2025. A special holiday edition of Bowery Boys podcast dropped into podcast feeds after being recorded live at City Winery as Bowery Boys History Live. Hosted by Greg Young, the Hot Victorian Holiday show leaned into a looser, more irrelevant live format than the standard podcast, blending history, humor, and onstage visuals with unmistakable Bridgerton-era flair, featuring an all-star lineup of historians and creators, including Aaron Radford Watley, author of Hot Victorians, Meet Your Dream Man from the Past. The performance showed how history podcasts can thrive as a live variety show, then seamlessly transitioned into evergreen podcast episodes packed with personality, comedy, and festive storytelling. This had to be a blast to be in the audience and watch them bring this history to life and pair people together. Like, who would you have dated in the Victorian era?
No, exactly. And like, this is like kind of like a fun thing. Like, as somebody who I wrote something that's set in pseudo Russian. I've like read a couple books in order to inform my mind of the tone. But like, I'm also, two of my best friends are history buffs. One of them is an ex-history major. History comes up all the time, and these conversations that these guys talked about is just like, this is why history majors are fun. Yeah. Make yourself some history major friends. You won't regret it.
And they do reference that the live performance was a little bit different of a variation than the regularly recorded podcast. So, they're creating this event where they're bringing their fans together and they're performing live, on a whim. Whatever happens. It's live. We're going to act this out and just have a good time.
Exactly. You can see some of that camaraderie as well. Like, whenever you're on the live stage and you invite your audience to take part in your personal journey and your personal episodes, it's like you see the person's reactions. Like, if you're listening to a podcast from home, that's great. You can imagine what the interactions are, but sometimes it's fun to be like, oh my God, he gave him a shoulder bump. That's cool. Or like, oh my God, I felt like I saw that look between them. There's something more to that statement than I realized. And live environments can bring that.
Yeah, well, I always joke at home, if you're listening to a podcast at home and you've never seen the host or the guest, and you picture yourself in the room, maybe you picture the host, you picture the guest, and you think what they look like based off of how they sound, and you're never right.
Oh, as somebody who's listened to a lot of audio dramas, and a lot of audio dramas have like news-based formats or even narration-based, it's so funny to like see people do fan art of the protagonist. It's usually the narrator. And just like, they don't even look the same. Like, they don't even look the same at all. Like, with Cecil Palmer, like a lot of the people drew Cecil Palmer as like this this blonde guy with glasses and like in like this purple waistcoat. Whereas the actual Cecil Palmer is like white, but he doesn't have any hair and he has like blue eyes and he doesn't always wear glasses. He sometimes does, but it's just like funny being like, you can see like what people thought they saw versus like what the actual person looks like.
Yeah. And like you referenced, when you're there in the live environment, you can see how the host reacts in real time, how they react with questions, how they make eye contact with the audience, how they engage the audience. Yeah. You don't get any of that from a recorded show, but you get a whole nother level of, if you're a fan of a podcast, you get this whole new look at who these people are and shake hands with them, thank them for creating the podcast. Well, it's just a great way to connect that you don't get from an MP3 file.
Exactly. And like, it kind of like bridges that gap between like theater and like stand-up comedy. Not always stand-up comedy, but there's like a format for stand-up comedy that like usually a lot of these live shows mimic, because it's like person, mic, and you in the audience. Yeah. But it's like there's that element of theater with like the lights and the presentation.
Yeah, one thing that I like to say in the model that I built here for this podcast theater, it's very similar to a comedy club. It's not much a stage, there's chairs, people perform, people react, right? Yeah. It's not different. But a comedian is mostly very protective of their content. They're performing it over and over in different iterations, they're working on different things, but that content may be seen multiple times on multiple stages. When you go to a live podcast, and this is you will never see this performance again. Yeah. So when you were there for that recording, when you took in that show, that's the only time in the history of the world that show will happen. So that's why live podcasting is so much more unique than comedy and music, because the musicians play the same songs in every town. Podcasts, when you see a podcast episode live, they can't record that episode live again next week. That episode's done.
Exactly. They've already discussed it.
You get one chance, and to be there in that moment and experience what they're performing, it's unlike any other industry out there.
Exactly. And like it's very good to have moments that you can say like, I saw this, and this particular moment I can like live with, which is I could compare it to a couple theater productions that I've been to, but I feel like I wouldn't quite do that justice. So I feel like the next one can like also talk to this ability to see it once live, because there's people even bringing it to the broader stage.
Well, musicians, comedians, they fill up arenas and stadiums why not podcast? How about this one? Look at the picture for this one. A podcast turned Christmas into a stadium-sized give back. On December 19th, the German podcast Fest in Flauschig, I guess, marked a decade of its annual Christmas circus with a record-breaking live charity event. Fest in Flauschig, they're making me say this a couple times. Flauschig Live, 10 von 10 anniversary Christmas with Jan and Ollie. Celebrated by Spotify, the sold-out show drew more than 12,000 fans to Barclays Arena, raising over $1.1 million for charitable causes, with donations continuing into January 2026. Hosted by Jan Bomberman and Ollie Schultz, the night blended comedy, music, surprise guests, and live performances, proving that podcasts, when taken to the arena scale, can rival traditional benefit concerts in both impact and generosity. And two things here. One, here's a podcast doing good. This is a fundraising event.
Exactly.
And two, look at the scale at which they're doing it at. Would you have thought 10 years ago doing a podcast in your basement or your home studio that it could grow to be something like this, where you're doing a charity event for the community, you're bringing the community together, and you raise $1.1 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these kind of events are like, this is like definitely breaking new ground for this type of medium, because like I never would have thought about this myself if I was back in 2012 getting into podcasts. And I have seen a lot of these stadium type works done for like TTRGBG podcasts, where like the audience will come to see them play like a video, like not a video game, but a board game. And like they bring in lots of people, and they have, like, as you can see in the picture here, like they have bigger screens for people that are in the back that need to see what's going on. Like there's a lot of different like acoustics. Like it's definitely a different experience. And I think it's good to see more of that, because it exposes people to different mediums, and it kind of breaks and redefines what you can do as a performance.
Yeah, podcasting pushing the boundaries. That's the core of our belief here. Mm-hmm. And this is just next level on every scale. We've done stories about podcasts that have done fundraisers. Mm-hmm. We've done stories about podcasts who have filled arenas and theaters and auditoriums. But be able to put together a fundraiser with an arena show for the holiday season, everybody's in a good mood. It's Christmas time. We're having a good time, and we're doing good. Like we're giving back more than we're taking in this case. And I love that, podcasters who do it for the passion. These people probably love being on stage. They love seeing their fans. They love doing this event for the community. And I just think it's a win-win all around.
Yeah, exactly. As you can see, like they have some time to like put some set declarations to kind of set the tone. And it's like there's a lot that this type of medium can bring back to the audience. Not only just the reaction of the host, but kind of like this is what the host envisions whenever they are in their element, and it's bringing it to you.
I don't know if anybody can tell watching at home or watching the replay on the video, but I modeled this stage after that. So, I mean, it should look the same. Yeah. Our stage is decorated just like their stage. It's pretty close.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And our last story tonight, we don't always do live podcast stories, but this one has the potential to have a great live presence in their school, in their community. And this is school districts are finding their voice on the mic. And I'll talk about my perspective and where I think the future of this story is. North Olmsted City Schools recently launched a new podcast, Voices of the Nest, using the medium as a way to spotlight positive stories across the district. Co-hosted by Superintendent Chris Calaris and Communications Coordinator Amy Rutledge, the show was designed as a short monthly podcast, about 15 minutes per episode, featuring staff, students, coaches, events, and community members. The debut episode highlighted North Olmsted High School boys basketball coach Matt Joseph and focused on the district's core values, signaling that the podcast isn't about announcements, but about connection. Built to grow organically and serve its local audience, the show reflects a broader trend of schools and public institutions using podcasting as a modern storytelling tool rather than a traditional broadcast channel. And they're hitting every single note of the foundation that will build great live community events. think of how this podcast is 10 months from now, or as the juniors become the seniors and they're into their second year. And there's a fair, there's a community event, the pierogi day at the local parish, those are places where the community is getting introduced to the people of the school district, to the members of the community. This is the groundwork for building live shows in that area. And as this thing grows and becomes more immersed in the community, imagine how it'll be at the festivals and the fairs when, hey, our main event tonight is the North Olmsted City Schools podcast with Superintendent Chris.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I, because this can kind of be like a way to like bring the community together. And like, so I have like a couple layers to this one. Like the first layer is like a lot of schools, like in like, especially rural communities, the school is the lifeblood and what like pumps the community up. Like everybody goes to the high school football games. Like it is what keeps the community together because they're gathering together to make sure the next generation is taken care of. So my school that I grew up in, because I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, had like a morning news program that they would put on. And this reminded me of that kind of program a little bit. Like it got the students involved in exploring media. But the other thing this reminded me of, there's NPR does a feature where they have contests for the students to submit, and then they'll publish their show live on NPR. So it also has a way to engage their community in like telling not only their local stories, but maybe like what are some stories that Joe in class A wants to share with the world, and like they can do like featurettes and stuff to express that.
Yeah, that's a great NPR program. It comes up every once in a while. I think we did a story about it, and when it comes up, kids from all over the country. And here you have a group, what do they call it? Not a committee. Whenever you join something at school.
Yeah, like it's like a club or a function.
You join a club, podcast club. Yeah. So they're building like a podcast club. Each of those kids theoretically are getting this experience, getting this skill set, and they could be able to enter that. This school might have 4 or 5 finalists on that NPR contest.
Yeah, you could build it that way. Like you could sit there and say like, hey, like if you're a part of this club, some of the stories you feature, we're going to have a committee vote on which ones we're going to submit to NPR. So then that way, like, because I do stuff during the year called the 48-hour film festival. So some groups will even organize that where they have a group of writers write the script for the 48-hour film festival, and then they choose from that group, and then that's the film they produce. Versus some other groups, it's like one script, one thing, one production. So it's so another way to get those stories and more diverse stories and give people more of a chance to like share themselves rather than that one shot.
Yeah, we've had a couple stories back-to-back weeks about schools, universities building these podcast clubs, building podcasts internally. If it's something that your school is thinking of, explore it. See if you can find a sponsor, a teacher, a professor who will sponsor the club, and get this started. Because the skills that you'll learn, even though this is a high school, those kids have to be there. That's the law. You got to go to school. But if they join this club, they're getting a skill set that they wouldn't get for years. They wouldn't get. They're accelerating their public speaking. They're accelerating being comfortable talking on the microphone in front of an audience. Those are skills that'll carry with you throughout your life. And if you have that club, or if you have an opportunity like this, jump on it, take advantage of it. You will be better long term. I promise you. These skill sets come back and assist you in ways that you never would have guessed.
Exactly. And even if like you don't necessarily like learn those skills when you're in there, it's exposing you to the ideas so that when you are ready to learn those skills, you're already, that first wall is down because you've gotten yourself comfortable with the medium and the idea. Because sometimes you need to get comfortable with the idea before you even get to that next step. So it's always beneficial, even in the small ways.
Yeah. Thank you to the school district for those of you who are putting it on. This is a great story to share. In the future, I'm trying to reach out to these schools ahead of time and try to like book little interview vignettes for the show. So vignettes for the show. So hopefully in the future, I'll be able to like, hey, let's go to Chris at the superintendent and let's get, why did he start this? And then we'll play Chris's video. But all the stories, all the links are in the show notes, including links to Jessica Sutton and the Fate of Korr with 2 R's.
Yes.
Jessica, one last time, tell people how they can connect with you or listen to your podcast.
So you can find the Fate of Korr on YouTube or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. We're also on Transistor. And just type Fate of Korr, Korr, and tune in, listen. And when you're there, please leave a comment. I want to know what you think of the story. My team has done a lot of great work, and I'm proud of every single member. And if there's a particular member that you want to give a compliment to, please leave it in the comments. I always tell them about their compliments.
Awesome. All those links along with our stories will be in the show notes. I'll go through my plugs really quick. Poduty shirts, the early bird special through the end of the year, $10, 4 colors, 5 sizes, $10 a shirt. The hats just arrived, $15. They're real nice button back. I think they have a mesh back, and so they'll be ventilated for the summer.
Exactly. I saw that hat and I was like, if my grandpa Art would have loved one of those hats.
That's the best compliment I've ever had. And if you love what we talked about, Poduty in the News is a podcast where we get together and talk about 6 stories about live podcasting. And we have a theater space here designed just to do that. I am so bullish on the future of live podcasting. I really believe that there's something here, that we built something special. We'd love for you to bring your show to our stage. We have a no contract, no minimum. We do a ticket share at the end of the night. Reach out to me. Reach out to Jeff at Poduty.com, Poduty.com. I'll tell you all about our program and how you can participate with no risk, no money out of your pocket. We'll build something special. We've been building it for 2 years almost, and we're going to keep going through 2026. And that's it.
Yeah.
We did it. 40 minutes in and out. That was a tight 40 minutes. We hardly ever keep the pace like that, but Jessica kept it on time and kept tremendous information. I mean,
You're welcome.
thank you so much for being here. My favorite thing is having guests on the stage, and to have you here and to have the conversation face to face, it just elevates the show in such a way that as much as I admire my virtual guests, being here on the stage means so much more to me, and we get to have breakfast.
Oh, exactly. No, it's great. And also as somebody that does audio drama, that's the same thing whenever you're doing in-person recording versus remote. Both can work for productions, but in person, there's a groundedness that you don't normally get. And that's why live events are important too, because there's a groundedness you don't always get when you're just listening to it in your car, even though both experiences are valid.
Yeah. So that means I only have one more question for you, Jessica.
All right. What's the question?
What time is it?
It is 10:37.
What time is it?